Welcome to Leaders and Legends, the podcast focused on leadership and clinical trial execution. I'm your host, Patty Lushton, CEO of Diligent Pharma. In each episode, we'll get to know the individuals who are driving change and influencing the direction of our industry. Whether you're a seasoned executive yourself, an emerging leader, or simply passionate about clinical trials like I am, join us as we discuss our industry's most pressing challenges, the future of clinical trials, and hear insights and advice from the leaders who are moving our industry forward. Craig, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure, Patty. This is great. I love doing this with you since we've known each other for so long.
Yeah. Well, we're going to kind of hear about your career journey, but where I'd like to start is actually with what you're doing now with your advisory. And I wonder if you could just say a few words about your consulting business.
Yeah, sure. So I launched IRT Advisors Group about 7 months ago. And I see my primary customers as sponsors who are trying to scale their IRT, what they decide to do IRT, a strategic vision versus whack-a-mole, vendor community to help them look at their product, understand the landscape, give them perspective from a pharmaceutical company. I used to work at BMS. And then also it'd be interesting engaging in some M&A work, in order to help people who are looking to maybe make a purchase to say, well, this is what the landscape looks like, and, through that journey as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of activity there these days. Yeah. And so I want to come back to that, but let's start with our shared history, right? Because, and start in the beginning of how you started in this business. And so can you talk a little bit about the organization that we both worked in all those years ago?
It's actually a funny story. The way the universe works, if without like a change in schedule and a summer job, I'd be a history teacher. But
wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I ended up in a summer job at Besselaar Associates, or Besselaar as it later became known, which was really, frankly, and I think you'll agree, the first international CRO. Like, I think that they really set the agenda. And through that, I got to work with people who basically seeded this industry that we find ourselves in. And I was really, really lucky to be in a position and to see clinical development at that level when it wasn't really specialized. Like people were taking lots of responsibility. And coming out of college after doing some summer internships, and just really lucky to find myself there and learn from such great people and be exposed to clinical development, and ending up in a protocol manager position, after years was really just something I'm very fortunate to have been there and to have learned from those people. And that's where we met. Yeah.
I mean, we were obviously very young in our 20s, right? So what did we know? But, I think you probably agree that there was kind of a special energy at that place. I think that there, what I recognized was at a young age, just this pursuit of excellence and the, just the drive, and you could just feel that there were some great things happening. And of course, Dr. Besselaar, Hein Besselaar was a force, and I learned a lot from being just in his orbit and working with, people who went on to do great things, like Jeff McMullen and Tiani and others. So it was a real training ground for so many of us in the industry.
I look on that with great admiration and affection. Like,
me too.
There was really important. It set me on my career, and it's things I return back to even today, when I think about what I'm doing now.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think just that commitment to quality, and that I think that's what stayed with me over many decades in my career as well. So it's fun to sort of reminisce with somebody who is, working in that environment back in the day, the early days of the CRO world. And is that where you kind of got deep into IRT, or was it after
Yeah.
Besselaar? Like, walk me through how you got into the whole IVRS
Yeah.
area.
So what happens again? It comes through Besselaar because people that we know had IRT, when it was IVRS, really starting in the mid '90s, was starting to take off, and when Besselaar became a different organization, they had a group that did that, and from them started a small little company called ICTI, and people like Kevin O'Shea and Dan Scanlon,
Yes. Oh my
you know,
gosh, Kevin. I haven't heard that name in a while. Yeah.
Scott McCarty, and they
Yeah.
created this organization. And I was a protocol manager, and there were very few IRT experts at that point. It was a thing that nobody really even heard of or knew how it worked or what it was. And
Yeah.
so they gave me an opportunity and said, "Hey, Craig, we just won this big contract, and we need somebody to come in and hit the ground running." I'm like, "I don't really know about this." And they're like, "Your clinical operations is a great start. You understand how clinical
Mm,
run, so we're gonna teach you this niche of it and how it works." And I got to tell you, I just fell in love with it. I was like, this is really cool. This is a narrow area that I can focus on. And really, it just tickled me. I just thought it was great.
yeah. Well, I think there's something very satisfying about becoming a micro expert in an
Mm,
area that is important in the sort of the clinical trial execution,
yeah.
kind of continuum, right?
Yep.
Because there's so much that goes into a clinical trial, and this back in the day was kind of game changing, right?
Yeah.
Like even though the technology has improved leaps and bounds from
Yeah.
back then, I think it was I was very impressed that you guys were doing this and inspired. I mean, I
Yeah.
started my business a few years after that, and I remember meeting with Dan and team in
Yep.
your offices.
Yep. Yeah.
And yeah, it's really yeah, I was really blown away with what you guys were doing back then.
It was so impactful. Like, it literally changed things. Like, this industry changed things like, oh, we can package and label clinical material entirely different, and we can deploy way more sophisticated randomization schemes. Like, it literally like changed how you could design a study and how you could implement
Right.
a study. And what you said about a micro, it's like, I'm in a niche of a niche of a niche. Like, explain to,
Yes.
well, what do you do? It's like, ugh,
Oh yeah.
like
I know.
that's a
I
challenge.
know.
And it actually is even a challenge in our industry when I tried to make people understand the impact of getting IRT wrong. Like, if you get this wrong, it can really have
Oh, it's
a negative impact.
devastating.
It's devastating. And I don't think
Yeah.
people always understand that.
Well, I think that's why it was impressive, because I think in general it is difficult to launch new things in this industry because of the conservatism which is warranted. We're a regulated industry, obviously,
Mhm.
and something that is has the potential for risk in terms of getting a randomization wrong, or screwing up with anything that is patient facing.
That's happened.
um, yeah, but like you said, there you got a big contract and you were getting momentum there, and I kind of lost touch. But my understanding is that business was eventually sold. Is that
Yep.
right? Talk
And
about
that
that
became
aspect of it.
Almac, right? So the
Okay.
bones of Almac is started ICTI, and I was the 12th employee there, and people I hired while I was there are now part of the Almac team. So and
Hmm.
and sort of ICTI was a bit to IRT like Besselaar was to the CRO world. Like, there are probably three main IVRS providers, but it helped seed an industry. So that was
Yeah.
the second time in my career I got to be at a company like that.
Well, getting back to just the environment at Besselaar, now that we're talking about it, it's not surprising that there were some innovators that came out of that early environment, and it also goes to show you that you should not underestimate people, because I mean, I just remember my role. I was writing proposals back in the day
Mhm.
And as you know, Hain Besselaar would read every
Yeah.
single proposal.
Yes.
And I was scared to death of him at the time as a 23-year-old, but also was learning a lot from him. And Dan was my guy where like, Dan, I have to get this proposal out. And there's something going on with my computer. And he would just sort of come up and he'd be very calm and, say things like, well, you might want to just turn it off and turn it on again and see if that works. And then he goes on to start this company. And, I mean, it's just pretty cool, right? Like, it's the people we met there and the careers that they've all had. And,
Yeah. And
uh,
if you think about people I hired as IRT project managers who are now general managers of IRT companies, right? Like
yes.
that's
Yeah.
just very, that's one of the prouder things, that I'm proud of the teams I've built. And someone gets
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity, to join Besselaar when maybe it was a stretch for them. And so now my job is to give those opportunities to other people too. I think I did that early in my career.
Yes.
I'm going to do it more now again.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the more gratifying things about being in the business for many years. You kind of get to reflect and think back on the individuals that you worked with or helped or mentored, and then have sort of seen their
Yeah.
career progressions. And yeah, so I know that when you went to Fisher, you kind of went like almost like a layer deeper in the whole IRT space. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that a bit?
So when I got to Fisher, they were going to build their own sort of IRS type system, and it was of a time. So it was like 2001. When
Mm.
I got there, and so they were going for fax, right? Doing it via fax, OCR recognition, web, and
It's
voice.
so funny to think about that now, like given where we are
I know
today. But
EDC for granted. I'm like, I
I
remember at least
know.
Butera, like, oh, we're gonna fax the CRF pages in. Like that was like phenomenal. Oh my God, we'll get so much faster about this. When you think about where we are now versus the things that you and I did,
I
like
know.
it's crazy. But when I got there, they're like, yeah, and they were a packaging, labeling, logistics, and depot organization, right? So that was
Hmm.
part of IBRS I knew about, but I wasn't really deeply engaged in. I was more on the clinical operations side, being a protocol manager. When I get to Fisher, I'm like, oh, now I see the second half of this business. Now I'm in packaging,
Right.
labeling rooms. Now I'm watching the logistics. I'm watching IVRS orders arrive at a distribution center and go out the door. And now I'm like, okay. I mean, I always knew it, obviously, but it was like,
Yeah.
I see it closer. Now I see really how this all connects.
Yeah, which is really cool because there's so many details involved in every step of the process, and in many ways that kind of brought you full circle with. And I could see how it was kind of seminal for the other things that you've done
Yeah.
in your career. And I think it's I don't know I sometimes hear from people who tune in to the podcast who are more like younger in their career, and they'll comment on something somebody said about, maybe not, things not necessarily going well in the beginning
Yeah. Yeah.
and having big, big setbacks. And
Yeah.
then, that actually put them on another. And
Yeah.
it's,
And that
you know,
happened.
it,
That happened to me.
yeah. So talk about that a
Yeah,
little
so
bit.
as I love my job at Fisher, and it's funny. It's like I would have stayed there if not for an opportunity, right? So
Mm,
I get this other opportunity um, to join Dan again at his new venture at and that was a personal risk I took. I was turning a certain age, and it's like, oh, Craig, here's your opportunity. Jump in, be an
mm,
entrepreneur, and whatnot. And um, it was very hard. We're self-funding, we're doing all this work ourselves, and it was really tough. And in many ways, when I look at it, I'd say it was possibly an operational failure, right? The business did not take off, but
mm.
we had some big wins. Top tier pharma company came to us, we developed some stuff for them, And wow, I learned so much in that, right? So now I'm moving from
Mm,
operations to business owners, and I'm, examining MSAs and sort of doing that work. And, I believe truly that the universe puts you where you belong. And
yeah.
having been through that process was a setup for my next thing, which was BMS, which, is sort of like one of the capstones in my career was coming out of that organization and arriving at BMS and them saying, well, we saw what you did at that organization. That's why we hired you specifically.
Mm.
You ran a business. We want someone to look at this department like a
Oh,
business and take that type of ownership of it. So even, and I believe this clearly, anyone who says, oh, I had an unencumbered trajectory in my career, they're either not really being that honest,
or
or
they're
maybe they
not
were lucky.
taking any
Yeah.
risks, or
Right.
yeah, you're right.
So they're
I
not
mean,
taking risks, so they're playing
yeah,
it safe. And
playing
I
it
was gonna
safe.
take risks. And I was like, I'm gonna do this. And that sort of setback was a setup for the next thing.
Mm,
I wouldn't have traded that. People are like, oh wow, would you sorry, like, no way. That helped me get to that next thing, which was, you know, a terrific I love my time at BMS, and it was pivotal for me.
mm.
Um,
Well, yeah, and it's important to note too, because when you're in the moment of a failure, I think sometimes it feels like that's just your life and that's your career,
right,
and that things are not sort of like a little bit when you might be like, not feeling well or sick or something's
right,
going on health wise. You think, oh, this is, I'm never going to get out of this, right?
right,
But
yeah. What
to
have I
it's
done?
yeah, so of course, looking back, you can see that it paved the way for some
100%.
very interesting things. And
Yeah,
and I know you have talked about BMS being a turning point, but why was it a turning point? Like
yeah,
what happened there that
yeah.
was the kind of created this change for you?
Well, I would say the first part is moving from vendor to sponsor. So now all those
Oh,
really things,
right.
understand why they did. I'm like, oh, now I get it. It's like, I
It's
thought I
so
knew everything.
that's yeah, it's such a good point because I went from sponsor to vendor, right? I was at a big pharma company and then I went to Besselaar, and that is eye opening, obviously,
Yeah,
because you're involved in everything at a CRO, and the
yeah,
pace is incredible and it's very exciting, and
yeah.
but going from vendor to sponsor, and it's happening all the time, every day now with
Right. Yeah.
the way people move in
Yep.
this industry. So,
So
yeah,
I
that's
got to learn
interesting.
I got to learn a different language, and I got to see why they made the decisions, and having the vendor side help me inform them why the vendors are making those. Is like, well, they're saying this because of this, so I was
Yeah.
now able to talk both sides. But I would say the real turning point, the thing that I say, like, this turned my career in some ways, was the MHRA inspected BMS. And
Mm.
that was, I sort of felt a little bit like, this is probably a terrible analogy, but a little bit like Paul Revere, like, the British are coming, the British are coming. We're to tell you what you need to keep your eye out on, because
Yeah, yeah.
the truth is, in the IRT industry, we gave a wink and a nod to a lot of things that we should have been doing much more deeply. Things like human read audit trails available in these systems, they were available if a developer pulled them up. They were human readable, but not human understandable. And I think
Mm.
this year, around 2019, the MHA decided it's time to hold IRT to account for what they should have been doing for all these years.
Oh.
And because the way these regulators work is they'll find something, they'll spend a couple years really paying a lot of attention to it, like a PII and GDPR. A couple of years ago, that's all.
Mhm.
About. They spent, I'd say, 2 years saying, like, we're going to take a look at IRT more closely, and we're going to tell people what we expect. And that turned into I wouldn't say new expectations, but clarified expectations around audit trails, who owns that data, data governance and risk assessment in changes.
Mm.
And I walked out of that inspection feeling like, okay, now I see things more clearly about why they're saying those things. And now I'm going to be an evangelist for this. And so I started reaching out to other sponsors and saying, hey guys, you need to be aware this is coming. These are what these new expectations are. And I'd get a little bit of pushback. Craig, that can't be, come on. We've been doing it this way so long. It's like, no, I'm telling you, these are the types of, and it wasn't that we weren't doing anything different than anybody else was.
Right.
The things that the industry was doing. So this was an industry problem. It was
Right. Interesting. So, like, the regulatory expectations became heightened, right? So then that created the catalyst for BMS to do things differently. Yeah. So that's wow. Okay.
To insist that their vendors did things differently, and I probably, I call it, my traveling talking tour. I would speak at every conference I could. I would connect with all the sponsors I could. And I would connect with the vendors who were supporting us and say, these are the expectations. This is what we need to do to change. And they pivoted to do that. Even last week, I was, or 2 weeks ago, I was in San Diego at this conference, and a vendor we worked at the time says, Craig, we base what we do now on the work we did together when you were at BMS coming out of that inspection. And that now guides how we do things. And and in the beginning, some other sponsor friends of mine would say, Craig, no, I think you got that wrong. We'll believe it when we see it. And I'm like, it's coming. Be prepared.
Yeah.
And then and they would come back to me and say, my goodness, you were right. And I'm like, we can do better.
Craig, it says a lot about you that you didn't just sort of kind of take that knowledge, make your team at BMS better, make your vendors better, but you took it upon yourself to proactively start reaching out to others. And like, what do you think that was about? Like, what prompted you to do that? Because we're all busy in our jobs, right? But so it's not something anybody was asking you to do.
No.
So why did you do that?
No, I don't. It's going to sound so Pollyannish, but it's just part of my ethos. It's like, hey, listen, I'm a member of an industry. Like I work for a company, but what we do is important. And that support patients on their journey for unmet need. And I take that very seriously. And I've made a lot of friends in this industry, and I didn't want them caught off guard. I didn't want them embarrassed. I wanted to be able to reach out to them, say, hey, listen, this is coming, and I want you to get ahead of this because it would be good for our industry. And again, this sounds self-serving. It was just, that's just my makeup. That's if I see something that I think other people can learn from, I'm going to say it and do it. And that has led to some tension when I moved back to the vendor side. It's like, no, this is the way we need to do things. And I'm going to say those things. And that's uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Sometimes being a truth teller can be uncomfortable. But I get it. I feel like, there've been times in my career where just something bugs me. Like you could have this visceral sort of reaction of like, there's so much duplication of efforts. There's so much inefficiency. There's so many working in silos. It's like, in some ways, those are could be easy problems to solve if we would work together or if there was a sharing of information so that the real tough stuff can be addressed. The things that are adjacent or right in the center of patient safety, or the more complicated things like, even strategic relationships can be complicated. But when there is knowledge that can be shared, or like in our case with Diligent, a platform where you can just access information that can become available, it just, in some ways, it feels like the low-hanging fruit so that there is a platform for then innovation and growth and higher quality. And it starts with a visceral feeling of like, this is not right. And I think that maybe is something that you and I might have in common a little bit. Like we've been in this world for a long time, and we're part of those early days of seeing very passionate people wanting to do great things. And I think it kind of just gets in your DNA.
Yeah, and that's where we go right back to what I said, what we both said in the beginning. Like being with those people in the beginning taught us, my first job was at a gas station, and my boss would say,
Hmm.
"Greg, why aren't we cleaning today?" Like, and then through my
Yeah.
career, I've had people have like expected more. And so I just brought that through my career. And when I had this experience, I was going to share it. It felt
Hmm.
what was right to do for our industry, you know?
Well, I sometimes ask in this podcast, I ask leaders, what do you want your legacy to be in this industry? And I kind of feel like this is a legacy. Like if you have people 7 years later who are still saying to you, Craig, when we worked together back in 2019,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
shared all of
It's
this
on
information
this
with
thing.
us, it changed. So that is very, very cool. Um, so, I think one of the opportunities that you had was to work outside of this country, right? And
Yep.
you worked internationally, and I wonder if you could just spend a minute talking a
Oh,
little bit about
sure.
that.
It was again a great opportunity. I wasn't looking for it. It came to me. I'd just been married. My wife and I were both CRAs. At what
Oh, I
we
didn't know that.
yeah,
Did you
yeah,
meet
yeah.
her at Besselaar,
Yeah,
or?
no, we met at Besselaar. She worked
Oh,
for
I
my
didn't
mother
know
and
that.
I.
Okay.
And so the Besselaar at that point, or Corning Pharmaceutical Services, was looking for CRAs to go to Asia to basically teach GCP in the region. They had a Singapore office. So we went to Singapore for 6 months, and that was what a great cultural experience. It was a great learning experience for my career, and seeing a different part of the world and being deeply engaged in that. And I held on to that. And then now, I prior to starting IRT Advisors Group, I worked for Tycoon Pharma Services, which is a Shanghai-based packaging, labeling, logistics company
Oh,
that
okay.
would bring their own IRT product, and that gave me the opportunity to do basically a 2-week tour of biotech in China. So 4 city tour, and meeting leaders, CEOs of biotech companies in China. And I was like, okay. And that gave me a broader, view even more. And, this thing we do is international. Like people say, like,
Yes.
what guy we follow FDA. I'm like, no, we also follow MHRA and,
And the
ICA,
Chinese FDA. Right. Yeah.
and the EMA, and, all those,
Right.
so uh, this industry of art lends itself to being international, but the opportunity to live in Singapore and to spend a fair amount of time in China recently has really been impactful to me in my career, and also seeing it again, like the different ways and approaches and regionally.
Yeah. And I think that there's just something about kind of being embedded and being there that has you sort of understand nuance a little bit more, right? Like because we're all working. I've always had international clients, but I think when you're actually there and there's more of a day to day around it, it
Yeah.
deepens the knowledge. It kind of fills in the sort of the blanks, right?
And
And
even when I was at Fisher, I would go to Horsham in the UK twice a quarter, right? And
mm,
being there in that part of the world too, and in Europe, and
yes.
also very impactful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think all of this, it makes sense to me why you would start your own consulting advisory, given everything that you have to share. But I mean, it is still a leap to start
Yeah,
your own
for sure.
business.
For sure.
And yeah. And so, yeah, what what was the motivation, and why did you start
Yeah,
IRT Advisory Group?
I would say, every job has taught me something. And going back to being on the vendor side, I sort of felt a little bit constrained on my voice, right? Like I had
Mm,
everything I wanted to say, I had to like put it in like, okay, how are they going to feel if I have very strong positions on things like deferred functionality in IRT, or, you know, IRT providers writing and running UATs on behalf of sponsors. And I felt constrained that I'm not able to talk about things that I believe because I'm associated with a commercial organization. And I thought, you know what?
Mm.
I just want to talk about what I believe to be the best way to do something and help sponsors do that, and to help, vendors, sort of come to terms with those things. And I just felt like it was at a point in my career where I said, you know what? I think it's just how I wanted to position myself as helping people who are like, we don't know what we're doing and we need somebody to help us do this, or we want to scale up and
Yeah.
next thing, and not feeling constrained by any organization to be able to say what I believe the best approach is. Does that make sense?
I think it makes total sense. It's very freeing, and it's also when you're so passionate as you are about the work that you're doing, having the ability to speak your mind, and
Right.
it's all in the spirit of improvement, of trying to
Yeah.
drive change and improvement. And one of the things I saw back, I mean, I started my first company in the late 90s, and
You've had
then,
this
but
journey as well,
what's
right?
that?
You've had this journey as well, Patty. So, I mean,
Yeah, I think the thing that started to evolve after, some time, a couple years, you start to see how different types of organizations are approaching the same issue, right? The big pharma versus the small pharma and biotech, the CRO world versus the sponsor world, and having that objective viewpoint and the line of sight to how all of the industry is working is
and
also, it strengthens your ability to be, to support the industry, right? And then, of course, at Avoca, we were kind of operationalizing that insight with our research and things like that, and using research to try to drive some change. But just it makes sense what you're doing because you have seen this world of IRT from all these different angles, both sponsor, vendors, internationally, and you're now supporting all of those types of organizations does make a lot of sense.
yeah, I love IRT, Patty. And that sounds so
You know
weird.
what? I love that you love IRT, Greg, because I mean, I have a lot of respect for people who really do a deep dive into an area for it's gratifying, but also for the purpose of bringing that knowledge forward. And then, after years, it becomes who you are. And then you're able to do great work. And that's what this is all about. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And so I think it's really great. And I know we're, coming to a close here, but I wanted to end this just by asking you, just kind of from a macro standpoint, what you're seeing in the industry today. I mean, you have so much longevity in this industry. How would you characterize what's happening now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always feel like every time you're in is an exciting time, right? Because you don't know what the future is. You're only seeing like, wow, remember what we used to do. And we talked a little bit
Yeah.
about that before. I think the things that I find really intriguing now is, it's almost embarrassed to say AI because everyone's talking about it, but I don't think, I've had terrible experiences with it. I use this budgeting tool, and the AI bot calculated my, rate of return incorrectly. So
Mm,
I
yeah.
and I think you and I have talked about, AI is a tool, and but AI is very interesting to me. We're just scratching the surface. I also think like inclusion in clinical trials are really important. If you notice, like the language in trials have changed from patient
Yes.
and subject to participant, which is really about being a part of a trial and not being put upon, for
Right. It's a very positive change
yeah,
in
I
that
think
regard.
it's a positive
Yeah.
change. I think, technology is getting way better. I'm a little disturbed. There's so much specialization though that I don't think people see the whole picture. as much as they should.
Yes, I know what you're saying. And I don't know, I do worry a little bit because there is, I mean, I'm running a tech company, so obviously we're leveraging AI to the fullest. We have a very purposeful AI strategy. And when you're in it, there's not the mystery to it. You know
Yeah,
what
yeah,
it can
yeah,
do, the limitations, the guardrails that you have to have in place, and you know that it's not going to replace subject
right.
matter expertise,
Yeah,
right now. Like you need the
yeah.
SMEs,
Never
and it's
been in
really
an
important.
HRA inspection. AI has never been in an MHRA inspection. They
Mm,
don't know
yeah,
what that, but the
right.
tool set is amazing. Like what
It's
you guys are
amazing.
doing is
Yeah.
it's amazing. Like what the capability is.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I sometimes uh, wonder, though, if there is a need to get back to basics with clinical trial execution around good communication. And, just there is so much room for improvement in terms of driving efficiency. And when I look at even, like some of the larger organizations are really struggle with organizational silos
Yeah,
where there is such an opportunity for internally, uh, better collaboration.
yeah,
So sometimes when you put AI on top of sort of a system that isn't optimized to begin with, it's not, you can't expect miracles to happen from that. Now, there might be incremental improvements, but I think that there is a need to look holistically at you know, organizations and how clinical trials are being run and executed, and just kind of looking at it from all angles. So yeah, I'm fascinated by what's happening right now in the industry, and I feel grateful to be still in it and a part of it,
yeah.
like you
Agree.
are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I
Yeah,
do think AI is really important, and agree. And I think you and I, in previous conversations, if you don't get your base business correct, then AI is not going to help you do that. Like you need to like those silos breaking down and true execution and people knowing how to do their jobs. And putting AI on top of that isn't going to make
yeah.
those things away.
I, I was talking with a client, a head of quality this week. You know, went to visit one of our clients, and she is very tech forward as a quality leader and is embracing AI. But she also said that there is a risk with the whole garbage in, garbage out notion of training a model with information that is
No good.
faulty or not great. And when you are kind of just distributing tools across an
Yeah.
organization, there is knowledge and guardrails and training that needs to be done, and a playbook.
Yeah.
And so it's quite complex, but it's opening up a lot of opportunities. Uh, but it's not this simple, like you said, silver bullet.
Yeah.
It needs to be handled
Yeah. People need
correctly
to
and appropriately.
they need to do it
Yeah.
thoughtfully. I mean, sometimes when I interact with I literally say, this is not true. Like it'll produce something. I'm like, this is not true. That's absolutely inaccurate. And I
Yeah.
get back and whatnot. So, but it's a tool.
Mhm.
I always say it's like, Excel is not accounting.
It's a
Excel is
great example. It's a great analogy. Yes. Right. Right. Well, Craig, thank you so much. It's been fun to sit down with a longtime friend to kind of walk down memory lane a little bit. And I really appreciate you being part of the podcast today.
yeah. Thank you so much for asking me to join you, Patty. And, I love the series you have going, and I'm very honored to be asked to contribute.
Oh, thank you. Well, we'll stay in touch.
We absolutely.